In the Darkness I See by Anon Y. Chapter 2. My Time in Peru. Part 2. After the half-day's travel had finished, my reminiscing too, and all us still not a many words spoken between strugglers of life-affirming, meaning-rich satiety, realized that the structure and the human beside it, in the shortening distance, was our destination. I took a centered moment to marvel at the place of my retribution to come, a man and a structure. We all had finally arrived, and I was lost to enter that prestigious shack. No verbal greeting was given, only a waft of the hand gesturing us to sit. Not much more of the start to that entering graces me with ready remembrance. I do remember, however, the circle of attendees, none of much notoriety. Many of them were dissatisfied youths that could have found solutions in their problems within the comfort of their own towns or cities, speaking to any professional psychiatrist, names adorned with 3 letters, Ph.D. The experience seemed to be just another shallow distraction for them. Their prosperous future was just a potential bonus. Nonetheless, those people took part in the ritual with open minds and bodies. There was, too, an older lady inhabitant of our controlled insanity. About my age, in fact. After the sub-spirit formalities were over, breathing sessions were undertaken to stimulate alignment. Some other ceremonialities also followed until eventually the ayahuasca was administered. The burning bitter taste compelled me to gag immediately, and from that point of initial reaction, my nausea only strengthened. I retched several times. While the physical symptoms of the drug were obviously uncomfortable, I knew of the discomfort well beforehand, and so was able to place their surface distracting effects at the back of my mind. Of course, this was with the help of the shaman and some mysterious aids that had seemed to appear from nowhere. The mental activity was incredible. All the while the psychological reactions were taking place, we were instructed to sit upright and hum at the most stereotyped tone. Soon after that collective humming harmonized, my second puking session began. With my neck roasting from the acidic aftermath of my stomach's revolt, I tried distorting my body into a myriad of inhuman positions to ease the aching. It was all worth it. The shaman, using colorful feathers interwoven into a mitten-like glove, passed over my face a multitude of times, the tingle of which has never slipped my mind. As if carrying my hefty body through the looking-glass and into the spiritual realm, he then caressed me. His hands were dried and cracked from years of concocting that putrid perfect DMT-laden beverage. But the truth of that skin that managed to spring me from those helping hands and into revelation, that was saturated absolute. My vision began to distort. Soon following my transient sight's delusion, a sickening serenade also ensued. My trenchant heartbeat grew, pounding throughout my entire body, reverberating through me. After some time, I was offered a mental choice: to lose myself completely or stay normal. I chose the former. I cannot explain what happened after my unconscious mind had made that decision. Amos, however, had described a passage between stagnation and realization long before I had gone to Peru. He had used the colloquial door to depict the autonomy of that choice, and to help me explain the sudden breached entry into the mechanisms of my mind that was to ensue after my realizing myself and seem before releasing myself. I, in my trance, saw that passage. My path was long and narrow, but so gloriously bright. I could taste it, the cleanliness that resided without me. For a timeless moment, I felt my presence would only serve to ravish the pristine passageway with the filth, as my more-than-me voice repeat called it. It was not guarded by any dichotomous threshold. It peered into me indifferently. I felt warm as the light and I searched within me. We made no judgments. Good from evil, knowledge from ignorance, divinity from humanity. Their polar meanings' repercussions became as ineffectual as my resistance to the toxins that flowed through my body. There was nothing but it and I. I begged us for entry. The long tunnel of light was embellished with a black hole. The stark change from black to white rang with perfect balance along the circular border of my newest intrigue. Somehow, I knew that the circle was only a two-dimensional representation of a definite sphere. Affixed within the vast brightness, the orb irradiated its darkness into me. The decision was final. I knew immediately that one step towards the anti-light would pull me in with the might of 100 men. I leapt in. The next confused hours were spent truly inside the menacing realities of my life. The choices I had made, and the assorted reasons why, all faced me at once. The truth was revealed to me repeatedly in the form of hands. From left to right and top to bottom, they surrounded me and grasped, mangled, and moved me. I danced in their palms for a while, and then nothingness engulfed me. Suddenly, a hand pressured down on me from the abyss above, squashing me into a pool of knowledge. From my former form, I flowed down a glass tube filled with memories and relationships into a beaker. Once I was bubbling within the beaker, consciousness zoomed out. With perfect clarity, I saw the distillation setup through which my new form had just flowed. Then I proceeded to flow through another section of the apparatus, and another, and another. Throughout the process, I revisited all the pain and hurt picked up during my time on Earth. My fluidity graced me with timelessness as I became enchanted by the great souvenirs of my life. Unrestrained, I had finally burst from my temporal entrapment and flourished. The process was neither painful nor splendorous, only didactic. No matter what form I took, my meaning became more concentrated, held within the precipitates of each synthesis step. As I passed through each stage of my emporium of evocations, all the significance was not in me, but rather of a fabric entangled within the trail of existence. I was only who I had become, and then only who we remembered. Words could only understate the visually inconceivable happenings that ravished all of me in those moments following my cognizance of individuation. As I shifted between powerful hallucinations of physical change, my soul danced with great conviviality. I was too, and then and simultaneously now transported to a conception of the fourth dimension, the warping of time and space into perfect geometries and planar arrays, ravishing my eyes. The colorful activity of those complex structures kept my mind aghast until the next manipulation of my form took place. Within all the generative deconstructions gifted to me by the DMT, there was one subset of seemingly meaningless parts in which I wish I hadn't partaken. Too overwhelming in spectacle or banality to denote with words, I wished the pieces of meta-me away shortly after their inception. One memorable disgrace was me as a hot slurry of tar and oil. Once liquefied and superheated, I was poured into the face of George Washington. In another vision, I flew atop a large bird-like creature whilst it devoured a bed containing St. Peter, Darwin, and my mother. The resolution of my vision closed with a magnitude, a multitude, an enormity of hands holding me down in my childhood room for thousands of years. As the time wound on, I watched from the bottom corner of my dwelling while the room transformed. I peered at its conversion into different family rooms and offices, and then stared at the entropic powers as they took a hold of the landscape, roots distorting and breaking through the floorboards. With the precipitative drilling from above collapsing the roofing structure and rotting its protective cover, the turbulent hurricanes bombarding its walls, and then the calm zephyrs soothing the rubble, I watched everything fall to ruin. I experienced all the scenes from within me. After my room's destruction, the dynamic space turned to wondrous greenery for some time. But then the green expanse was suddenly eviscerated by a sun's luminous explosion. The bright boom blinded me. As I was white, I thought, wow, this must be the least original transcendence experience ever. Are we all really this same? We laughed, and another 1,000 million years shifted on until, once visually able again, my consciousness was left floating through space. While the changes took place, the hands, one by one, released me from their collective grasp and disappeared. The closure left me feeling a total sense of tranquility. The purity of that feeling had never been so abundant as in those moments. With tears rolling from their receptacles, I slowly floated back to reality. On my knees, I wept for an additional hour or so. Screaming at my past and hoping for my future, I trembled with anticipation for my next adventure. Shaking, I eventually rose from the muddied grass patch I had torn up. I looked around for my troubled peers, my being barely holding on to reality. Concluding my search, I only found my shaman, sitting, smoking, and staring back at me in silence. "There is so much more to come," said my teacher. The shaman then wished me well in continued silence, placing a feather in my hand. I smiled with great ease. With a throbbing head and a bloodied nose, I stumbled off, my body vile once again. That serenity heart, that precise emotion, I never found it again. Once I had successfully traversed my way lonesomely back to my temporary home just outside of the jungle, I cried again. Those tears poured with such abundance that they could have filled pens of thumb thimbles. Dehydrated and withdrawn, I returned to my bed and slept like a train in sand. That night, no dreams were had. The remainder days of my trip were spent thoughtfully remembering what I could of my more actual trip and analyzing each partial experience. While thoughtfully paralyzed, biliousness struck me over and over. I chalked it up to the repercussions of filtering strange substances, and, with my piles of paper damp and fragile from the jungle's humid onslaughts, I worked on, eventually writing in small, large text upon a wall. "Freud was right," I wrote. "Freud was right," I furiously scribble-scratched. "Freud was right!" Not only did I ignorantly by way freshly realize the perfection of Freud's explanatory framework for the human experience, that was his theorization of human consciousness as that famous triplet balancing act, but too and more so did I marvel atop the soapy upped base of his box. That man, so hated by me before, was so quickly deemed right. I had been determined, in every facet of my work, to disavow him. I had felt that he had placed people into eternally restrictive boxes, his work like moribund salutes to free will, too weak to bend to the dynamic nature of people. But now, with my misdirected envy finally understood, I danced in acceptance. Like a brilliant bass thrown into an information pond, I gulped down all his work, reading through all the literature I was able to have emailed to me. It became quite clear as I combined my experience with Freud's work why his use of drugs had been so imperative to his theorizations. The various state changes brought on by such taboo elixirs simply made outside observances of internalisms. As the days passed, realizations were commonplace, becoming almost physically draining. By the end of it, I had iso-deluded myself into certainty on many things. For instance, I really thought that I was onto something full and final, that the theories of ours, yes, ours, simply temporally separated, could control, could take, as fillable and finalizable, could become encapsulate fullable. What a thought of thoughts. It was all, in the end, shattered by fright, the last night spent in the city of Iquitos almost killing me. In the spirit of, when in Rome, do as the O'Rourkes, I thought it best to become inebriated with an assortment of South American beverages. I visited El Musmuki, a local pub. After some numbed drinking, the bar closed. I took my last shot of tequila and stumbled to a taxi to take me to the airport. Before I could enter my exit, though, I was captivated by something in the periphery of the nighttime. There they were, 3 shadows lurking in the noxious putrefaction reserved only for a star-lit, septic alleyway of a nowhere-adjacent town. 3 suited men loitered, one tall and slender, another round and plump, the third perfectly average. They were just standing there, and, with the confidences of countries, were looking for or at something just around the corner. My curiosity was piqued. I asked the taxi to wait a moment while I investigated. Like a simple creature called to a fire or an entranced insect compelled to a flower, I moved towards them. I quickly closed in on the three hazy figures, my senses dulled from the booze. Once in close quarters, their mystical outlines unblurred to reveal their details. I soon enough found myself standing beside the tallest of the few. Wearing a black suit with the letters P.A. pinned to his lapel and his eyes sunken into his skull, he peered down at me. The gaunt and ghostly giant had a large forehead that was juxtaposed with a hollow facial structure. It was cracked and scarred, that forehead of his, and his cheeks were lowered. I glared incoherently at him. Ravishing his visage with my sight, I discovered an additional disfigurement. What I found between eye jolts was an awful scar. It was not some calculated cicatrix made from a precisely lunged or maneuvered blade, or even a contact wound of any reasonable nature. It was a sadistic burn, devouring half his face. The feature was only lost within the jagged beginnings of his hairline. As I pieced together the gravitas of our easily spotted one-out group, the tree-like man gestured disapprovingly at me. With no discernible emotion bellowing out from his statuesque and antiquated face, he communicated his ache. Next to the Goliath, in a blue suit with a slightly skew TU affixed to his lapel, stood the one of small stature. He was slumped and comfortable, his smooth skin resembling that of a castrated child, perfectly polished and velvety. The generously bestowed rotund features made for a cartoonish appearance only opposed by the grimace his face held so uncompromisingly. The last of the three, in purple and boasting a J.U., stood at about eye level. With a face that told no story, saturated with shadows, his indescribable expression's non-geometric allure protested his suit's formal opulence. His face was remarkably unrecognizable, no discerning individuality present. In fact, it seemed to be to me, only the beginnings of a man's face, a rough outline etched. All three of the men, eyeballs focusing on my chest, and in total silence, stood steadfast. In my unsober clumsiness, they, threefold and instantaneously, diverted their blaze at me, into my eyes, at me. There was still nothing to be heard. I moved from the comfort of beside the giant and shifted my stance to the center of the alley, all eyes on my searing discomfort now. I choked up a question, asking, "I heard there was a UN meeting close by. Who are you, Jerusalem?" I pointed at the proportioned man's abbreviated pin. None of them responded. I nervously chuckled and offered an alternate greeting to them, saying, "Sorry, I meant, are you representing Jerusalem?" They remained silent and strong in their anonymity. After a moment, the third man introduced himself and his partners of such bewitching mystery. "It's time. Come with us," he said strongly. With a bubbling mixture of delirium, confusion, and fear, I retorted, "What do you mean? I'm not even from this place. I come bearing no harm." "Not here," he responded. "Then where, damn it?" I questioned. An answer materialized from the man's sacred snout once again, reverberating through my hollow chest. A message boomed. "It's time." I felt their combined desire to reach out to me, their craving to absorb me, rang in my ears. I was stuck in that eternal moment. What felt like lead shoes and millennium micro-minutes lasted on and eventually on until it all mounted in a surprise breaking of my paralysis. It was the sharp beep of my taxi that broke it, and oh, how thankful I was for that rusty savior as its echoing shocks reverberated through that alley. With my heart thumping through my chest and a black hole called me needing gone to be, I suddenly broke my immobility. I ran so fast and so needfully towards that taxi, and still my spirit stayed strides ahead of me, its formless elasticity pulling on me to aid in my acceleration just enough. "Oh, please," I cried wordlessly, "please be just enough to escape the frightful need to be free." Solely existent blue. Expecting my pre-assailants to be in pursuit, I looked back. They hadn't followed. They didn't move. I jumped into the cab, and we sped off into the strangely comforting darkness of the jungle. From the dirty rear windshield, I looked back for the men again. Only their memory remained. Once back in the comfortable hierarchy of my hometown, and remainingly wanting to further grow my understanding of reality, I became obsessed with the use of DMT. I had captured a glimpse of the universe through the eyes of God, the collective being, only spliced into subsections by the blade of subjective consciousness, and so being back in my separative skin stinkingly stung. Oh, though, how that woeful epee was so willfully sheathed and dulled by my subsequent substances. With my brief organic chemistry background, permitted access to a colleague's lab, and a mimosa hostiles root powder connection from Connecticut, I indulged in weekly trips, then monthly trips, and then... I never reached the equal potency of that shaman's mixture, the serendipitous force of life exclusionary after. Each new time my father was with me, watching from above. Sitting on his glorious throne, so unburdened, his ubiquitous glow embraced me throughout each new journey. I have not translated a single total thing here. This has been Chapter 2, Part 2 of In the Darkness I See by Anon Y.